Good. Could you all hear the gong okay? And it didn't become tinny or fall away. Sound was okay. Good. So I'm going to just begin with a couple of the prayers that I always use to begin a retreat. So first, the prayer of refuge and bodhicitta, and you can hum along if you like, or repeat with me. In the Buddha, the Dhamma, and supreme spiritual community, I take refuge into full enlightenment by the power of generosity and all six perfections. May I realize Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. And then the prayer of ultimate refuge and bodhicitta. I take refuge in the expanse of space, primal awareness, and unconfined capacity, which is the nature of everyone's mind, for the sake of all. So I want to say a few words related to that last prayer in connection with our practice of inclusive mode, and then lead inclusive mode. And then we'll have some breakout rooms for a few minutes for people to be able to connect about the practice, and then come back into large group for the last period. Okay, that's our agenda. In that last prayer that I said, it says, I take refuge in the expanse of space, primal awareness, and unconfined capacity. And those are three fundamental qualities of the deep nature of our minds in the Nyingma Dzogchen tradition that I share from. And in particular, I want to draw attention to that last quality, unconfined capacity. So the deep nature of our minds has a naturally all-inclusive capacity, which, if not impeded by narrowing habits of thought and reaction, is automatically and naturally and spontaneously all-inclusive of all parts of ourself, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, all-inclusive of all other beings, all-inclusive of what we experience as our inner world, our outer world, all of it. And we draw on that actually in our practice into the inclusive mode. So let me back up a bit and say a little more about that. So all of us have been practicing these sustainable compassion practices that are adapted from Tibetan Buddhism. So you'll recall there's a receptive mode and a deepening mode and an inclusive mode. So in the receptive mode, and I'm just sort of summarizing what I know all of you have been practicing with me, with Paul, with other of our meditation teachers in your groups, in our retreats and so on. In the receptive mode, with that field of care meditation and the compassionate presence to feelings meditation, we learn to establish a holding environment of acceptance and warmth and compassion for all of our feelings, thoughts, and reactions. Is everybody following me? You recognize that? That's what we do in receptive mode, and also with compassionate presence to feelings. We're establishing a holding environment, or through those meditations, we become a holding environment for all of our thoughts, feelings, reactions, parts of ourself, etc. And we let that holding environment help to process and heal all that by letting all that be held in that holding environment without having to even try to do anything about all those thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. So is that clear enough so far? Then in the releasing phase of those meditations, the last phase, the releasing phase, and also with the letting be meditation, which is really what we enter into in the releasing phase. we begin to settle into the source of that holding environment, which is the deep nature of our minds. We begin to settle into the source of that holding environment, the deep nature of our minds. And that's the deepening mode. So in this process of increasing receptivity and deepening, the same holding environment that holds all parts of us naturally becomes the basis for holding others also equally in acceptance and warmth and compassion, while also sensing them in the depth of their being. And that's the inclusive mode. So I'll just repeat that. So in that process, through the receptive and deepening mode, in that process of increasing receptivity and deepening and sort of establishing that holding environment, settling into the source of that holding environment in the deep nature of our minds, then that same holding environment that holds all parts of us just naturally becomes the holding environment for all others as well, helping us also to sense them from the depth of our being into the depth of their being and wish them well. And that's the inclusive mode. So that's how the receptive and deepening modes naturally unfold into the inclusive mode of practice. Is that okay so far? So the point of mentioning all that is because it informs our practice. When we understand that, that's the framework that we're exploring and practicing into, then we understand how to practice and kind of let go into the practice more and more, understanding where it's taking us. So just to say something more about the ground of all this, the power of deep acceptance and warmth and love and compassion at its source is naturally all-inclusive. And the source of that acceptance and warmth and compassion, the undivided emptiness and lucidity that is the nature of our minds, has no division or boundary. So it can spontaneously include our whole inner and outer world, spontaneously include all thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and all beings, if it's permitted to do so, this nature of our mind, this unity of emptiness and lucidity. It already encompasses all at the level of emptiness. In a sense, in the level of emptiness, it's already including all in its lucidity and in its kind of all-inclusive capacities of warmth and acceptance and care. But what's prevented us from experiencing that consciously, that natural all-inclusiveness, are just inner obstacles. That is, habits of self-clinging thought and reaction, klesha in Sanskrit, that are not intrinsic to the nature of our minds, but are strongly habituated. Habits of thought and reaction that the mind is strongly habituated to identify with and react from. The mind's in the habit of doing that, but that's not intrinsic to its deep nature. It doesn't have to do that, in other words. It's just an enormously strong habit to do that, to narrow to reduce what had been all-inclusive to a very narrow frame of mind and react from there. And when I was reflecting on these things just thinking about these things for various purposes, including for this morning, I recalled one example of what I was just summarizing embodied in a teacher that I studied with many years ago when I was a graduate student. And my wife Barbara and I were living in India, within South India, within a Tibetan community. And I was studying with Tibetan scholars. Oh, actually, this was in North India, the Sarnath, the Center for Higher Tibetan Studies. And I was studying with various Tibetan teachers there. And one of them was named Geshe Tupten Sering. I mentioned him briefly in my book, Awakening Through Love, but he was really something. He was by far the most popular teacher in that center of higher Tibetan studies and Indian Buddhist studies. Extremely erudite and learned, but the thing about him was, as soon he lived in a hovel, basically, is the only word to describe it. It was like a little hut. He basically just had his robes, and he had butter tea offerings that he made each morning. Was the most probably expensive thing that he possessed, was butter tea in bowls. And as soon as you walked into his little hut, the first time I did, there were like a dozen students jammed in there, shoulder to shoulder and hip to hip, to be near him. And as soon as the door opened, one of the students let me in. This is the first time I sort of knocked to meet him. I was sort of desperately wanting to be able to study with him. I'd heard about him. As soon as the door opened, it was like an environment of warmth and care. It's like you were just stepping into an environment that Geshe Tupten Sering embodied. He was that environment. And, I studied with him over a period of months, and I'd hear a little slurping in the offering bowls, butter tea offering bowls, and there'd be these tiny, extremely fat mice with their legs up in the air, slurping from the butter tea in the bowls. And there was nothing, he never said anything about that. It was just part of the life in that hut. Even the mice could feel the warmth of that welcoming environment. It was a whole environment. And what was I studying with Geshe Tupten Sering all those months? Qualities of Buddhahood, qualities of enlightenment in texts. I was reading through the texts with him and hearing his commentary on them. And it was only actually years later, reflecting back on this, that I realized that really the main way that he was communicating qualities of enlightenment that we were studying was by being this holding environment, by embodying this spontaneous inclusiveness. That's what I'm getting to. Spontaneous all-inclusiveness of enlightened love, compassion, and wisdom from the very ground of his being, embodying the automatic spontaneous all-inclusiveness of that. That's what I'm trying to get to. So that's kind of the direction that our practice is taking us in, to experience some of the qualities from the ground of our being, the deep nature of mind, the emptiness, and the basic empty cognizance, which is the deep nature of our mind, of our being. To experience some of the qualities of that in receptive mode, settle with those qualities into their very source in the nature of mind with the deepening mode. And then from there, in just the most natural way, automatically letting that also become the holding environment for all others. And that becomes the inclusive mode. That's the idea. Kind of like Geshe Tupten Sering embodied. Very naturally. There's a quality you could feel, a powerful quality you could feel. Not a discursive, thought-made attempt to be very nice. None of that was there. It's like a power of his being that he'd become transparent to. So it's automatically, naturally all-inclusive. Okay. Is that sort of Clear enough? So shall we do a little practice? So what we're going to do again is go from receptive mode, accessing qualities of nature of mind, letting that help us deepen, establishing that kind of a holding environment from the very ground of our being in the nature of mind, and then let that become the holding environment for others. So we begin with the receptive field of care practice. And recall those 3 principles that we always follow of in that mode of accessing, noticing, and including. So accessing loving qualities of awareness, of our basic awareness, and then noticing whatever feelings and thoughts and parts of ourselves come up, and letting them be naturally included in that holding environment of loving qualities. We apply those same principles of accessing, noticing, including then also to all others in the larger world, noticing them, accessing this holding environment, establishing it, noticing that there are other beings all around us, and letting them be naturally included in that same holding environment. And this can be very helpful also for, just to mention it, since many of us are also practice leaders, this can be really helpful for people who find themselves as part of a group or community that need deep healing. This holding environment can hold them all. So, for example, if your ancestors have experienced much trauma, they can all be naturally included in this holding environment of loving energy and spacious care and healing. Like Lama does, Cheryl Giles, another Black Buddhist teacher, Melanie Harris, and others explicitly do that in their teaching. And then always in the final phase, we settle into the source of those qualities and the depth of our awareness, as in the letting be practice. So we'll just put all that together here. So to enter into this meditation, again, we're going to begin with our field of care. So it's very important to recall that and reestablish that as our holding environment. And then we let its loving energy come naturally through us to include others. And that helps us then sense them beyond our surface impressions and judgments of them all. Helps us resonate with them in their fuller depth and dignity and wish them well. So we're going to repeat the field of care practice with that natural expansion of it. And that's meditation 6 in our handout. Everybody should have that compassion training handout of meditations. If anybody doesn't, then please let me know and I'll send that to you. I've also updated that over the summer. So if anyone doesn't have a copy from this summer, then let me know. I can send you a more updated one. So first of all, then, just need to recall what's your best field of care, the one that's most effective in connecting for you. And be ready to bring that to mind when we come to that in the meditation. Okay? Okay, so let's begin. So first, just loosening up a little bit if you need to. Okay, and then with back comfortably straight, I can come down from the thinking mind into the body. And just settle into the feeling of the body as a whole. Just relaxing into it and letting the weightiness of the body help the mind to deeply settle. And let the breath just flow naturally while breathing from the abdomen. So it expands with each breath. And let the feeling of the abdomen moving with the breath just draw you into that feeling more and more, breath by breath. And now bring to mind your field of care, your caring moment or benefactor or spiritual field, and experience that as present to you now. Not just as a memory or abstraction, but as happening right now, right here, really present to you. And you are being seen and held in deep care and compassion, acceptance and warmth, beyond judgments. And just relax into this experience and steep in its loving energies and feel its tender qualities. And let them spaciously infuse your whole being. Accepting this loving energy and its qualities into your whole body and mind. Every part of you loved in its very being. Every part of you loved in its very being. And now, whatever feelings or thoughts or parts of yourself that may arise, just let them immediately be naturally included in this holding environment of loving energy, spaciousness, and deep acceptance. Whatever arises is spontaneously, naturally included in that loving holding environment. Let all thoughts or feelings that arise within that holding environment just find their own place to settle in their own time by just letting them be. And now think of someone kind of dear to you that you'd like to include in this holding environment. Just whoever comes to mind who's like that. And let them also be included in this spacious holding environment of warmth and acceptance and loving energy. And let this holding environment help you sense them beyond superficial impressions. To just commune with them in their deep dignity and capacity and wish them well, deeply well. And now let further people or beings come to mind that you would also like to include in this holding environment of warmth and acceptance and care. And let those further people or beings also be included along with the first one. Letting this holding environment of warmth and care and acceptance just help you sense them and their deep dignity, the depth of their being, and wish them all well. You can also, if you wish, bring in a few people or beings that are less familiar to you. Let them also be included in this holding environment of warmth and care and acceptance. And let that help you sense them and their deep dignity, depth of their being, and wish them well too. If you have difficulty with this at any point or find yourself struggling with it, then just settle back again into the holding environment of your field of care. Settle into that. And when ready, if you wish, then come from there back into this inclusive mode. Including others in the same holding environment that holds all parts of you. And finally, if you wish, you can just let the vast underlying capacity of warmth and compassion from your basic awareness just expand much more fully to include all beings, human, animal, all creatures. Or just imagine that's happening. Let this vast underlying capacity just naturally include all, or imagine that it is. And let that help you sense them all in their deep dignity and worth, and wish them all well. All beings. And now let this all-inclusive, loving, holding environment just help your mind to relax deeply now in the releasing phase. And letting your mind release all of its frameworks of worry or concern, and just become naturally wide open like space. Just reunite with the natural openness that's already here in and through all. And let whatever thoughts and feelings arise all just be processed within this sky-like openness of awareness. by letting everything be. Just let all the experiences process themselves within this sky-like openness of awareness by letting everything be. Okay, good, thank you. So that's meditation 6 in our compassion training meditation handout. And we can go into breakout rooms now. And I just ask each of us to just share from our experience of that meditation. Comments on your experience of it, or any questions that it raises for you. Is that okay? Okay. So, welcome back. Paul, thanks for setting up the breakout rooms. Okay, is there anything that anybody would like to share from the small group, or any further comments from your experience of the meditation, or questions that it raised? And also, of course, sharing from something that came up from the small group that we might all benefit from. Janine?
I just want to say that the small groups are extremely valuable to me. To break into 2, 3, or 4 people makes it much easier to share something that's intimate. So the small groups at the end here are very valuable, I think.
Good to hear. Thanks, Janine. Was the introduction that I gave to this meditation helpful in any way? Could that resonate through the meditation in any way? Things like that. Anything that comes to mind. Arlene?
This was very helpful, and so was the breakout room. In my own life right now, I'm meeting the opportunity to welcome all parts, both in myself, but in the family, where some people do not want a part of the family in the family. And I actually invited this part to spend tonight, and other parts said, no, you can, she cannot come into this house. And so I was left with, how do I welcome all parts? And it's enough to say I figured a way to do it that was welcoming all parts. And so I'm so grateful that this was the training that we did today, because I feel like this is a very new piece in me, how I'm living it in my life. Your introduction was so helpful. I took a lot of notes. Perhaps one of the biggest images, though, is the mice drinking the butter tea. I mean, that's and one other thing was, it's the idea that came from my breakout room from my partner was that this openness and welcoming is always there. So all I need to do is just sort of turn to it. And that's also very helpful. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Arlene. Any comments on that, from that? One for me is that as long as the mind is identified with one part, you could say one narrow sense of self, it cannot welcome all other parts. What can welcome all parts of us is prior to and beyond all those parts. It's that holding environment or that field of refuge from the nature of our mind that's prior to any particular part, can hold any particular part of us. It's not the mind identified with one sense of self, struggling to try to include all the other senses of self as they arise. That won't be able to do it. And that's what I heard you saying at the end of your sharing, Arlene, actually, was exactly that. Learning to rely on that, what's larger than any of the parts, to hold the whole parts. To learn.
Yeah, and this was perfect timing to reinforce the power and the reality of that. Oh, this is available here. I don't need to know right now how to deal with it. It'll come to me.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't need to know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the needing to know how is identifying with a part and letting that go. Thanks, that's really helpful.
And the instruction to let things process themselves. The instruction is not for whatever sense of self your mind is now identified with. Now you work out how to process these things. That's not the instruction at all. Just let things process themselves in this holding environment, in this field of refuge, this field of warmth and acceptance. Just let things be and process themselves in that. It's really a profound direction of learning gradually to let go of control to something that can do it better than any sense of self that's trying to control things. And Linda?
My group had a discussion about how the language in this practice is kind of evolving to include concepts like holding space and processes, let the processes open and be the way. And I have to admit, I haven't participated in the Saturday morning group for a few months now. So although I continue to practice with my small group on these compassion trainings, but I found myself getting kind of caught up in some of the language. And as we were doing the deepening and moving into this holding room, I was questioning, where does this holding room reside in me? And it felt like I felt like, from an analytical point of view, I can do this, all of this, and believe I'm doing it, but I'm not necessarily feeling that it's centered where it needs to be. It's residing up here like it's a ritual. So I was personally troubled by that. And yes. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, because I don't know how to even make sense of that.
Yeah, no,
Is that it?
yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
hear you, Linda. Yeah. We're kind of running out of time.
Okay.
What I would suggest, though, as part of what I'm hearing is we go into this in much greater depth in retreats.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul and I, in particular, have been leading some retreats, and we continue to have them listed on the website. I think they can be very important and rather foundational for establishing what the basis of this is and how to begin to sense our way into it more and more.
Okay.
Whereas the introduction I gave this morning was kind of assuming that people have been tapping into retreats, have all that background, and I could quickly go back to it. It's not trying to introduce it all. How do we move from the head more into the more embodied, fuller sense of it? Comes out more in retreat. So even one day retreat can bring that forward much more than just a session. So
I appreciate that. Yep, I appreciate that.
but I
Thank
also
you.
hear you. It's exactly what you're bringing up makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
So I think it's end of our time. Thank you all for your practice together, and